My wife told me about her affair with her boss, right after I paid off her parents' $190,000 debt. She said she's going to live with the other man and her parents. I responded, then all of you need to leave. They were surprised and asked, what? You know that feeling when you think you've got life figured out? Yeah, well, that was me, Grayson Moore, 34 years old and living what I thought was the American dream in Seattle. I had my shit together, or at least that's what I told myself every morning while sipping my overpriced coffee and staring at lines of code that made more sense than most people I knew. Systems analyst by day, hopeless romantic by, well, also by day, apparently. My life was predictably boring in the best possible way. I'd clawed my way up from being that guy who fixed printers in college to actually designing the systems that keep entire companies from falling apart. Not glamorous, but it paid the bills and then some. I owned a modest little house in Ballard. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. No roommates, no landlord breathing down my neck. Just me and my dreams of maybe, someday, filling those empty bedrooms with something other than my collection of vintage computers that nobody gave a damn about except me. The whole starting a family thing wasn't some biological clock ticking away. It was more like this quiet ache I'd developed over the years. Watching my buddies get married, seeing their kids' photos flood my social media feeds, listening to them complain about sleepless nights while secretly being jealous as hell. I wanted that chaos, that beautiful disaster that comes with loving people who drive you absolutely insane. Then came Ruben's birthday dinner, and let me tell you, that night changed everything. Ruben, bless his heart, had been trying to set me up for years with various disasters he called perfect matches. There was Jennifer, who collected ceramic frogs, Sarah, who spoke exclusively in movie quotes, and let's not forget Amanda, who brought her emotional support peacock to our first date. Yeah, you read that right. A peacock, named Gerald. But this time, he didn't tell me he was playing matchmaker. Smart move, because I would have found some excuse to bail faster than a politician during a scandal. Instead, I walked into that restaurant thinking I was just celebrating my buddy's trip around the sun, and there she was, Alicia. Now, I'm not the type to believe in love at first sight. That's Hollywood bullshit designed to sell movie tickets and overpriced wedding packages. But damn if there wasn't something magnetic about her from the moment she laughed at one of Ruben's terrible jokes. She had this way of throwing her head back, completely unself-conscious, like she didn't give a damn who was watching. In a world full of people curating their lives for Instagram, here was someone who seemed genuinely, refreshingly real. She was a school counselor, the kind of person who actually gave a shit about helping kids figure out their lives when the world seemed determined to screw them over. Smart as a whip, too. While everyone else at the table was debating whether pineapple belonged on pizza, like it was some earth-shattering philosophical question, she was making these wickedly funny observations about human behavior that had me thinking, holy crap, where has this woman been all my life? We clicked in that rare way that makes you forget you're on what's technically a first encounter. She teased me about my computer nerd profession, but not in the dismissive way most people did. She actually seemed interested in what I did, asking questions that showed she was paying attention. When I mentioned I'd built my own gaming rig, instead of rolling her eyes, she challenged me to explain why anyone would want 16 cores of processing power. I may have gotten a little carried away talking about parallel processing, but she listened. Actually listened. The conversation flowed like we'd known each other for years. She told me about the kids she worked with, not breaking confidentiality, of course, but sharing the funny, heartwarming, and sometimes heartbreaking moments that came with trying to guide teenagers through the disaster that is adolescence. I found myself hanging on every word, impressed by her compassion and her ability to find humor even in the darkest situations. By the end of the night, I had her number and a date planned for the following weekend. Coffee first, safe, casual, low pressure. But it turned into dinner, then a walk around Green Lake. Then suddenly it was midnight, and we were still talking on a park bench like a couple of teenagers who'd just discovered the opposite sex. The next few months were like something out of a romantic comedy, minus the contrived misunderstandings and the inevitable airport chase scene. We fell into this comfortable rhythm of seeing each other several times a week, texting constantly, and basically acting like those nauseating couples that everyone else secretly hates, but also envies. She fit into my life seamlessly. Movie nights on my couch turned into her leaving a toothbrush, which turned into a drawer of clothes, which turned into her practically living there without us officially acknowledging it. She laughed at my terrible cooking attempts and taught me that vegetables didn't have to taste like cardboard if you actually season them. Revolutionary concept, apparently. Her parents, Sylvia and Arnold, seemed nice enough when I finally met them. Older, retired, the kind of people who still sent Christmas cards and asked if you'd found Jesus yet. They were polite in that slightly formal way that parents get when they're trying to figure out if you're good enough for their daughter. Sylvia complimented my house with that particular brand of enthusiasm that meant she was being nice but wasn't exactly impressed. Arnold talked about his glory days in middle management like he'd been running Fortune 500 companies instead of a small insurance office in Tacoma. But they seemed to approve of me, which, let's face it, felt pretty damn good. They made small talk about my job, nodded approvingly when I mentioned owning my own place, and Sylvia even said I had good manners, apparently because I helped clear the dishes without being asked. The bar was clearly set pretty low, but hey, I'd take the win. Looking back, maybe the fact that their approval felt so easy should have been a red flag, but I was too busy being happy to notice, too caught up in the glow of thinking I'd finally found my person. Alicia was everything I thought I wanted: beautiful, intelligent, funny, and for some inexplicable reason, interested in me. So when I got down on one knee in Pike Place Market on a rainy Tuesday morning, because of course it was raining, this is Seattle, and asked her to marry me, her saying yes felt like the most natural thing in the world. She cried. I may have teared up a little, okay, a lot. And for that moment, everything was perfect. I thought I'd won the lottery, found my soulmate, figured out the secret to happiness that had eluded me for 34 years. God, I was such an idiot. So there I was, newly married and feeling like I'd cracked the code on this whole adult relationship thing. Alicia moved into my place right after our honeymoon. A modest but sweet little getaway to the San Juan Islands where we pretended to be outdoorsy people for a week, and I discovered that my wife could catch fish better than I could tie my own shoes. Should have been another red flag, honestly. Anyone who's that good at hooking things and reeling them in probably has some practice, if you catch my drift. But man, those first few months were like living in a goddamn Hallmark movie. We'd wake up together, she'd steal my coffee while I was getting dressed, and I'd pretend to be annoyed while secretly loving every minute of it. She had this way of humming while she got ready for work that made even Monday mornings seem bearable. We'd cook dinner together. Well, she'd cook while I provided moral support and occasionally chopped vegetables without losing fingers. And we'd plan out our weekends like we were mapping expeditions to uncharted territories instead of just deciding between IKEA and Home Depot. The woman made my boring-ass ranch house feel like a home. She brought plants that somehow didn't die under my care, rearranged my furniture in ways that actually made sense, and convinced me that throw pillows weren't just a conspiracy by Big Textile to separate men from their money. We'd curl up on the couch watching Netflix, her feet in my lap, talking about everything and nothing. She'd tell me about the kids at school, and I'd bore her with stories about server migrations and database optimizations that she pretended to find fascinating. We talked about the future like it was this bright, shiny thing we were building together. Kids, obviously. She wanted 2, maybe 3. A boy first, then a girl, because apparently we could just order them off a menu. We'd upgrade to a bigger house eventually, something with a real yard where our hypothetical children could run around and break expensive things. Maybe get a dog, one of those golden retrievers that look like they belong in a commercial for family values and American dreams. She had opinions about everything, and I love that about her. Where we'd vacation, anywhere with good seafood and no crowds of tourists taking selfies. What kind of car we'd get when my ancient Honda finally gave up the ghost. Something reliable, but not boring. Her words. Even what we'd name our future kids. I was pushing for something classic. She wanted something unique, but not weird. You know, the kind of conversations married people have when they think they've got all the time in the world to figure things out. Then one evening in November, everything started to shift. I came home from a particularly brutal day dealing with a system crash that had half the company convinced the world was ending, ready to collapse on the couch and forget that computers existed. But Alicia was sitting at our kitchen table with this look on her face. The kind of expression you get when you're about to tell someone their dog died, but you're trying to find the right words. We need to talk, she said, and my stomach immediately dropped to somewhere around my ankles. In my experience, conversations that start with those 4 words never end with good news and cake. She launched into this whole story about her parents' financial situation, and let me tell you, it was a doozy. Apparently, Sylvia and Arnold weren't just the harmless retirees I'd thought they were. They were drowning, and I mean Titanic-level sinking, in debt. Credit card bills that would make a lottery winner nervous, some failed business venture from years back that I'd never heard about. And here's the kicker. Gambling debts that predated Alicia's birth, but somehow still existed like some kind of financial zombie. "They're in real trouble, Gray," she said, using that nickname that usually made me melt, but now sounded like she was trying to butter me up for something. "It's not their fault, really. Dad got laid off right before he was supposed to retire, and Mom's medical bills from her surgery last year just piled up. They've been too proud to ask for help, but I can't just watch them lose everything." The way she painted it, they were basically one missed payment away from living in a cardboard box under the freeway, eating cat food and reminiscing about better times. Her voice cracked when she talked about them having to sell their family home. The place where she'd grown up, where all her childhood memories lived, where her dad had built her a treehouse that was apparently still standing like some monument to better days. Then came the pitch. And let me tell you, this woman could have sold ice to Eskimos or convinced vegans to open steakhouses. She suggested we renovate their old place and create some kind of duplex situation where we'd all live together. One big happy family, sharing expenses, helping each other out, building something beautiful together. "Think about it," she said, her eyes getting that bright, excited look that usually meant she'd found a new restaurant or figured out how to organize our closet more efficiently. "We could turn their place into something amazing. It's got good bones, great neighborhood, and the lot is huge. We could add on, create separate spaces, maybe even rent out part of it eventually. It would be like having our own compound, but classier." At first, I thought she'd lost her damn mind. Live with the in-laws. That was like volunteering for relationship suicide. Every sitcom, every comedy routine, every piece of conventional wisdom screamed that mixing marriage and in-laws under the same roof was a recipe for disaster. But Alicia had this way of making crazy ideas sound reasonable when she got going. She pulled out her laptop and started showing me Pinterest boards she'd apparently been working on for weeks. Room layouts, color schemes, kitchen designs. The woman had done her homework. She talked about how we could save money by combining households, split utilities, maybe even coordinate our grocery shopping. She made it sound efficient, practical, almost smart. Plus, she added with that smile that had gotten me to agree to so many things over the past year. It would be cheaper than buying a second house or helping them with rent somewhere else. And you know they adore you. Dad's always saying you're the son he never had. The more she talked, the more it started to make a weird kind of sense. Housing prices in Seattle were insane anyway. Her parents' place was in a decent neighborhood, close to both our jobs, with enough space to make it work if we planned it right. And if I was being honest, I kind of liked the idea of having family around. Growing up as an only child with parents who worked constantly, I'd always envied friends who had these big, chaotic family dinners and relatives dropping by unannounced. She wore me down over the course of several weeks, bringing it up casually during commercial breaks, sending me articles about multi-generational living trends, even suggesting we drive by their house, just to look at the potential. Every time I raised an objection, she had an answer. Worried about privacy? We'd designed completely separate living spaces. Concerned about compatibility? We'd set ground rules up front. Anxious about the cost? We'd save money in the long run. By December, I'd somehow agreed to the whole damn thing. Looking back, I'm not sure if it was her powers of persuasion, my desire to make her happy, or just the holiday spirit making me feel generous and optimistic about family togetherness. Maybe all three. Really? She'd squealed when I finally said yes, throwing her arms around me like I'd just agreed to take her on a trip around the world. "You're amazing, Gray. This is going to be perfect. We're going to build something incredible together." And you know what? For a brief, shining moment, I actually believed her. I thought we were embarking on some grand adventure, creating our own little dynasty, building a foundation for the family we wanted to start. God, I really was an idiot. January rolled around like a hangover after New Year's Eve, inevitable and way more painful than you expected. Alicia and I had spent the holidays measuring rooms, sketching floor plans, and watching way too many home renovation shows where couples transform disasters into dream homes in 30 minutes minus commercials. I was actually getting excited about the whole project. Hell, I'd even started watching YouTube videos about tile installation and pretending I understood the difference between drywall screws and wood screws. We'd set up meetings with contractors, gotten quotes for materials, and I'd started calculating how much this whole adventure was going to cost. My initial estimate was somewhere around 50 grand, not exactly pocket change, but manageable if we were smart about it. I figured we'd use some of my savings, maybe take out a small home equity loan, and spread the payments out over a couple years. Easy peasy, right? That's when Alicia dropped the bomb that basically nuked my entire understanding of our financial situation. We were sitting at my kitchen table. Our kitchen table, I kept reminding myself, still getting used to the whole married people say our thing, with renovation plans spread out like we were planning a military invasion. I was feeling pretty good about myself, thinking I was being responsible and thorough, when Alicia got that look again. You know the one. Like she'd just realized she'd forgotten to mention something minor, like the house was built on an ancient burial ground or her ex was a serial killer. "Gray," she said, and the way she said my name made my stomach do that thing it does right before you get food poisoning. "There's something I need to tell you before we get too deep into these plans." I looked up from the contractor estimates I'd been reviewing, and I swear I could see her gathering courage like she was about to jump off a cliff. Her hands were fidgeting with her wedding ring. Never a good sign. And she was doing that thing where she avoided eye contact by staring at some fascinating spot on the table. "What's up?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual even though every instinct I had was screaming that I wasn't going to like whatever came next. She took a deep breath, the kind you take before diving into cold water or telling your boss exactly what you think about their management style. Well, my family is. We're in more debt than I initially mentioned." "Okay," I said slowly. Because what else do you say when someone starts a sentence with "we're in more debt"? "How much more are we talking about?" That's when she hit me with the number that basically made my soul leave my body for a few seconds. $190,000. Not 19,000, not 90,000, but 190 with 3 zeros after it. The kind of number that makes you question whether you heard correctly or if you're having some kind of stress-induced hallucination. I just stared at her for what felt like an hour, but was probably only about 10 seconds. My brain was trying to process this information like a computer running on dial-up internet. Lots of effort, very little progress, and that annoying sound of everything grinding to a halt. "I'm sorry, what now?" I finally managed to croak out, because surely I'd misheard. Maybe she said 19,000, and I was just having an auditory malfunction brought on by too much caffeine and home renovation stress. But no, she confirmed it. $190,000 in debt. Credit cards maxed out to limits that would make a casino blush. Business loans from that failed venture I'd never heard the full story about. Medical bills that apparently reproduced like rabbits. And yes, those gambling debts that were older than our relationship, but somehow still kicking around like a bad rash. How was all I could manage. Not, how are we going to fix this? Or how did this happen? Just how. Like my vocabulary had shrunk to single syllables because my brain was too busy having a complete meltdown to form complete thoughts. She started crying then. And let me tell you, watching your wife cry is like being punched in the gut by someone wearing brass knuckles. She launched into this explanation about how her dad's business went under during the recession, how her mom's health issues created a cascade of medical expenses, how they'd been too proud to ask for help and too optimistic about their ability to dig themselves out. "I didn't tell you before because I was scared," she sobbed, and the tears were real. I could tell the difference between manipulation tears and genuine distress, and these were definitely the real deal. "I didn't want to scare you away. I thought maybe we could figure it out together, you know? Like, after we got married and everything was settled." That's when the real kicker came. She'd known about this debt the entire time we were dating. Through all those conversations about our future, all those plans we'd made, all those discussions about finances and goals and dreams, she'd been sitting on this information like it was some kind of classified state secret. "You've known about this for how long?" I asked, and I could hear my voice getting that edge it gets when I'm trying very hard not to lose my shit completely. "Since before we got engaged," she whispered, and there it was. The truth that made me feel like the biggest sucker who ever lived. I sat back in my chair, trying to process the fact that the woman I'd married, the woman I'd trusted with my heart and my future, had basically been running a con game on me for over a year. Okay, maybe con game was too harsh. She wasn't trying to steal my identity or sell me a bridge in Brooklyn. But she'd definitely been withholding information that any reasonable person would want to know before legally binding themselves to another human being. "Please don't be mad," she said, reaching across the table to grab my hand. "I love you so much, Gray. I was going to tell you. I didn't know how. And then we were so happy, and I thought maybe if I waited until after the wedding, we could tackle it together as a team." A team. Right. The kind of team where one player doesn't tell the other players about the giant hole in the field until after they've already started running plays. "We'll figure it out," she continued, her voice getting stronger as she warmed up to the topic. "I mean, you're so smart with money, and you've got your job, and between the two of us, we can make a plan. It's not impossible, right? People deal with debt all the time." She made it sound like we were talking about a moderate credit card balance, not a number that was larger than most people's mortgages. She talked about consolidation loans and payment plans and how we were young and had plenty of time to work it off. She painted this picture of us as a power couple, tackling challenges together, coming out stronger on the other side. And here's the thing that really gets me. Looking back, part of me wanted to believe her. Part of me was already doing the math, figuring out how we could make it work, wondering if maybe this was just another adventure we could handle together. Because that's what you do when you love someone, right? You figure out how to make it work, even when it is a financial disaster that would make a bankruptcy lawyer nervous. "We're married now," she said, squeezing my hand. "For better or worse, right? This is just the worst part, but we'll get through it. I promise I'll pay you back for everything. Every single penny. We're a team, and teams don't give up on each other." I looked at her sitting there, tears drying on her cheeks, hope and desperation mixed up in her expression, like she was betting everything on my reaction. And like the fool I apparently was, I didn't say no. I should have. Any rational person would have run screaming from the room, called a lawyer, and started figuring out how to get an annulment faster than you could say irreconcilable differences. But I didn't, because I was in love, and apparently being in love makes you stupid in ways that should probably be studied by scientists. So there I was, officially crowned as the world's most expensive husband. Not in terms of maintenance costs. I'm pretty low maintenance, thanks very much, but in terms of what it was apparently going to cost me to stay married to the woman I loved. $190,000. The number haunted me like a bad song stuck on repeat, showing up in my dreams and making me do mental math at the most inappropriate times. But here's the thing about being a decent human being who happens to love someone. You don't just walk away when things get complicated. At least, that's what I told myself as I started liquidating my carefully built financial future like I was having a going out of business sale. First to go was my savings account. $50,000 that I'd been squirreling away since college, built up through years of eating ramen, driving cars that were older than some of my coworkers, and generally living like a responsible adult who understood the concept of delayed gratification. I'd been proud of that account, checking the balance like some people check their horoscope, regularly and with unrealistic hope for good news. Watching that number drop to zero felt like watching someone delete your favorite video game save file. Years of progress, gone with a few clicks and electronic transfers. But hey, that's what savings are for, right? Unexpected expenses. Although I'm pretty sure when financial advisors talk about unexpected expenses, they're thinking more along the lines of a new roof or maybe a medical emergency. Not surprise. Your wife's family has been financially irresponsible for decades. Next came my stock options. You know, those things my company gave me in lieu of actual raises, promising they'd be worth something someday when we went public or got bought out by some tech giant with more money than sense. I'd been holding on to them like lottery tickets, dreaming about the day they'd turn into enough money for a down payment on a bigger house, or maybe a vacation that didn't involve camping and gas station hot dogs. Liquidating those felt like selling pieces of my future self. Every share I cashed in was a little bit of the life I'd imagined we'd have together. The nice house, the reliable cars, the ability to not check my bank balance before going out to dinner. But love makes you do stupid things, and apparently one of those stupid things was turning your retirement dreams into other people's debt payments. Meanwhile, we were actually moving forward with the renovation project, because apparently I'm the kind of masochist who thinks, you know what would make this financial disaster even better? Construction costs. The duplex plan was moving along like a freight train with broken brakes. Unstoppable and probably heading for a crash, but too late to do anything about it now. I have to admit, the renovation part was actually kind of satisfying. There's something therapeutic about tearing down walls and building something new, especially when your marriage feels like it's held together with duct tape and optimistic thinking. We gutted Sylvia and Arnold's old place, turning it into this modern duplex that would have made HGTV weep with joy. Separate entrances, shared common areas, enough space for everyone to maintain some semblance of privacy and sanity. For legal and practical reasons, and because apparently I was the only one in this family circus with decent credit. We put the whole property under my name. Alicia and her parents didn't seem to care about the paperwork details. They were just relieved to have someone willing to take on their financial catastrophe and turn it into something resembling a solution. Looking back, I should have realized how easily they handed over control of everything. No questions about ownership, no concerns about what would happen if things went south, no insistence on having their names on anything important. They were just happy to let me be the responsible adult while they figured out how to rebuild their lives on my dime. But at the time, I interpreted their lack of involvement as trust. They trusted me to handle the details, to make the right decisions, to take care of everyone. It felt good to be needed, to be the guy with the plan, to be solving problems instead of creating them. I was the hero of this story, swooping in to save the day with my steady job and my willingness to sacrifice for family. The work was intense. I was pulling 12-hour days at my regular job, then coming home to coordinate with contractors, deal with permits, and make approximately 7,000 decisions about things I'd never thought about before. Do we want brushed nickel or oil-rubbed bronze fixtures? What color should the kitchen cabinets be? How many electrical outlets were too many electrical outlets? Apparently, these were the kinds of questions that could make or break a renovation project. Weekends became an endless cycle of Home Depot runs, contractor meetings, and trying to make sure nobody was cutting corners on work that I was paying premium prices for. I learned more about load-bearing walls and plumbing codes than any reasonable person should know. I also learned that contractors have a very flexible relationship with the concept of on schedule, and that saying something will take 2 weeks apparently means somewhere between 2 weeks and the heat death of the universe. But somehow, we were making progress. The duplex was actually taking shape, looking like something people might want to live in rather than condemn. And more importantly, I was making steady progress on that mountain of debt that had become my personal Everest. Every month, I'd sit down with all the bills and payment schedules, figuring out how much I could afford to throw at this financial black hole. Credit card minimums, loan payments, medical bills. It was like playing the world's most depressing version of Tetris, trying to fit all the pieces together without everything falling apart. I picked up freelance work on the side, because apparently having one job wasn't challenging enough. Late nights and weekends spent debugging other people's code, building websites for small businesses, and generally turning myself into a coding machine that ran on coffee and stubbornness. Every extra dollar went straight to the debt pile, like feeding a monster that was never quite satisfied but always hungry for more. The math was brutal but manageable. If I kept up this pace, worked every freelance gig I could find, and lived like a monk who'd taken a vow of financial poverty, I could probably clear the whole mess in about 3 years. 3 years of working like a maniac, 3 years of no vacations or fancy dinners or any of the things that make life enjoyable, but 3 years with an end date. In 1 year, 12 months of this financial marathon, I managed to pay off $130,000. $130,000. That's not a typo or an exaggeration. I was basically paying more in debt service than most people make in a year, and somehow I was making it work. But here's the thing that should have been a massive red flag, the kind of warning sign that's visible from space. Alicia wasn't contributing a single dollar to this effort. Every time I brought up the idea of her helping with payments, even small ones, I got the same response. Gray, you know I can barely cover my student loans with what I make. The school district doesn't exactly pay counselors like we're investment bankers. I'm already stretching every dollar just to handle my own expenses. It was a reasonable explanation on the surface. School counselors don't make big money. Student loans are a real burden, and I made significantly more than she did. But something about it didn't sit right with me. We were supposed to be a team, right? Partners tackling this challenge together? But somehow I was the only one making sacrifices, the only one working extra hours, the only one whose bank account was hemorrhaging money. She was sympathetic about my long hours and my stress, always ready with a back rub or my favorite takeout when I came home exhausted from another day of paying for her family's mistakes. But sympathy doesn't pay bills, and emotional support doesn't reduce principal balances. Still, I kept going. Because that's what you do when you love someone, right? You make sacrifices. You step up when they need you. You prove that you're the kind of person who doesn't abandon ship when things get rough. And I really, truly believe that once we got through this rough patch, we'd be stronger for it. That we'd look back on this time as the period when we proved we could handle anything together. That all this sacrifice would be worth it for the life we'd build on the other side. God, I really was a special kind of stupid. Chapter 5. Laughter in the next room. You know that moment in every horror movie where the protagonist hears a noise upstairs and decides to investigate instead of running like any sane person would? Yeah, well, apparently I'm that guy. The one who walks toward the scary sounds instead of away from them, armed with nothing but curiosity and a spectacular talent for being in the wrong place at the right time. It was a Tuesday in late March, one of those Seattle days where the weather can't make up its mind between drizzling and actually raining. I'd been at work dealing with what our IT director dramatically called a catastrophic server failure, but was really just Jenkins having another one of his legendary meltdowns because someone updated a dependency without checking compatibility. Classic Tuesday stuff. The emergency call had come in around 2 in the afternoon. Servers down, clients panicking, everyone acting like the digital apocalypse was upon us. I spent 3 hours basically performing technological CPR, bringing our systems back from the dead, while a room full of executives breathed down my neck and asked helpful questions like, "Is it fixed yet?" every 5 minutes. By the time I got everything stabilized and running smoothly again, I was completely fried. The kind of tired that makes you consider whether living in a van down by the river might actually be a viable career alternative. All I wanted was to go home, collapse on my couch, and pretend that computers didn't exist for at least a few hours. So I headed home early, figuring I'd earn myself a break after saving the company from digital doom. The duplex renovation was finally finished. We'd been living in our separate but connected spaces for about 2 months now, and I was still adjusting to the weird dynamics of married life with live-in in-laws. It wasn't terrible, exactly, but it definitely wasn't the romantic newlywed experience I'd imagined. I pulled into the driveway around 4:30, earlier than usual, but not suspiciously so. The place looked normal. Alicia's car was there, along with Sylvia and Arnold's aging Honda that I'd helped them buy after their old car finally gave up the ghost. Nothing seemed out of place, no obvious signs that anything unusual was happening. I walked up to my front door, keys jingling in that particular way that usually announced my arrival to anyone within a 3-block radius. But as I got closer, I could hear voices coming from inside. Not unusual. Alicia and her parents talked all the time, mostly about normal family stuff like weekend plans and whose turn it was to buy groceries. But something about the tone made me pause with my key halfway to the lock. There was laughter, but it wasn't the comfortable family laughter I'd gotten used to. This had an edge to it, the kind of laughter that happens when people are sharing a joke that not everyone's in on. And then I heard another voice. Male, unfamiliar, with the kind of deep, confident tone that screamed middle management, or guy who wears expensive cologne to work. I'd never heard this voice in my house before, which immediately got my attention in the way that unexpected voices in your home tend to do. Now, any reasonable person would have just walked in and said hello like a normal human being. But something about the whole situation felt off, and my gut was telling me to slow down and pay attention. So instead of announcing myself like usual, I quietly unlocked the door and stepped inside, moving as carefully as possible to avoid the creaky floorboard by the entrance that always ratted me out. The voices were coming from the kitchen, and I could hear them clearly now that I was inside. Alicia was talking, sounding more animated and happy than I'd heard her in months. Sylvia was chiming in with those little comments she made when she was enjoying herself. Arnold was doing his thing where he laughed a little too loudly at everything, like he was performing enthusiasm rather than actually feeling it. And then there was that other voice, The stranger who was apparently comfortable enough in my house to be sitting at my kitchen table on a Tuesday afternoon. I moved closer, staying in the hallway where I could hear everything but couldn't be seen. Call it curiosity, call it suspicion, call it the same instinct that keeps people alive in horror movies when they actually listen to their gut instead of walking blindly into danger. "Do you think he knows?" the unfamiliar voice asked, and something about the way he said he made my blood run cold. There was amusement in his tone, like he was asking about a particularly oblivious pet rather than a person. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever, but was probably only a few seconds. Then Alicia's voice, clear as a bell, "Not yet. But once he finishes paying everything, I'm telling him. I'm moving in with you." The world didn't exactly stop spinning, but it definitely wobbled a little bit. I felt like someone had just told me that gravity was actually optional, and I'd been walking on the ceiling this whole time without realizing it. Sylvia's voice came next, with that particular brand of cheerfulness that meant she was enjoying herself immensely. "Finally, this house will feel less like a library." A library. That's what she thought of the home I'd bought, renovated, and shared with them. Too quiet, too boring, too much like the kind of place where people read books and had thoughtful conversations instead of whatever the hell they preferred. But it was Arnold's response that really drove the knife home. Poor Grayson. He really thought we loved him. The laughter that followed was the kind that makes you understand why some people develop trust issues. It wasn't malicious exactly. More like the laughter you'd hear from people watching a comedy where the main character keeps falling for the same obvious tricks. Fond, almost affectionate, but ultimately dismissive. Poor Grayson. Like I was some kind of charity case they'd been humoring out of the goodness of their hearts. I stood there in my own hallway, listening to my wife and her parents laugh about how gullible I was, how easy it had been to convince me to pay their debts and renovate their house, and generally play the role of the sucker in whatever game they'd been running. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and hit record. I'm not sure what made me think to document this conversation. Maybe some survival instinct. Maybe the part of my brain that still functioned like a systems analyst and understood the importance of backing up critical data. I caught maybe 3 or 4 minutes of conversation, enough to make it clear that this wasn't some misunderstanding or joke taken out of context. They talked about timeline, when I'd finished the final payments, when Alicia would break the news, how they'd handle the transition. They talked about this Greg person like he was her boyfriend, not some random stranger I'd never heard of. The whole thing was so casual, so matter-of-fact, like they were discussing weekend plans or what to have for dinner. Nobody sounded guilty or conflicted or even particularly concerned about the fact that they were basically planning to blow up my life as soon as it was convenient for them. When I'd heard enough to understand that my marriage was apparently a business transaction with an expiration date, I quietly backed out of the house. The same careful steps, the same attention to avoiding creaky floorboards, except this time I was leaving instead of arriving. I sat in my car for about 10 minutes, staring at my phone and the recording I'd just made. Part of me wondered if I'd somehow misunderstood, if there was some innocent explanation for what I'd just heard. Maybe Greg was a financial advisor they'd consulted about their remaining debt. Maybe Alicia was talking about moving them into a different part of the duplex. Maybe he really thought we loved him, was about someone else entirely. But I'm not that good at lying to myself, and the evidence was pretty fucking clear. My wife was planning to leave me for another man as soon as I finished paying off her family's debts. Her parents knew about it, approved of it, and thought the whole situation was hilarious. I was the mark in a long con, and apparently not even a particularly challenging one. I drove around for another hour before going back home, trying to process what I'd learned and figure out what the hell I was supposed to do with this information. When I finally walked back into the house, acting like nothing had happened, they all greeted me with the same warm smiles and casual conversation they always did. "How was work, honey?" Alicia asked, giving me a kiss on the cheek like she hadn't just been planning my romantic execution in the kitchen. "Fine," I said, because what else do you say when you've just discovered that your entire life is a lie? Just the usual server problems. And life went on like normal, except now I knew it was all an act. Every smile, every conversation, every moment of apparent domestic happiness was just part of an elaborate performance designed to keep me paying bills until they were ready to pull the plug. The weird thing? I didn't say anything. Not that night. Not the next day. Not for weeks afterward. I just went on pretending everything was fine while I figured out my next move. Because sometimes, when you find out you're the joke, the best revenge is letting everyone think you haven't gotten the punchline yet. 3 weeks. That's how long I spent pretending to be the same oblivious schmuck they thought I was, while inside I was planning my next move like some kind of suburban chess master. 3 weeks of coming home to fake smiles and phony conversations, watching Alicia kiss me goodbye each morning while knowing she was counting down the days until she could dump me for her boss boyfriend. It was honestly impressive how good they all were at acting normal. Alicia still hummed while she got ready for work, still asked about my day, still curled up next to me on the couch for our evening Netflix binges. Sylvia continued making those passive-aggressive comments about my housekeeping skills that I'd learned to ignore. Arnold kept trying to bond with me over sports I didn't follow and showing me YouTube videos that stopped being funny sometime during the Clinton administration. If I hadn't heard that conversation with my own ears, I might have actually believed we were a happy family unit working through our financial challenges together. They were that convincing, or maybe I'd just been that naive. Probably both. But here's the thing about discovering you're living in an elaborate lie. It gives you a certain clarity about what you need to do next. All those months of working myself to death, all that stress about making payments and managing schedules and keeping everyone happy suddenly seemed pretty fucking pointless. Because why kill yourself trying to save a marriage that was never real in the first place? Still, I had a plan. And step one of that plan was finishing what I'd started. See, I could have confronted them immediately. Could have stormed into the kitchen that day and played back the recording, watched them scramble to explain why they'd been laughing about my gullibility like I was some kind of reality TV show. Could have packed my bags and moved out, left them to figure out their own financial disaster. But that would have been emotional, reactive, messy. And if there's one thing my years in IT had taught me, it's that the best solutions are usually the ones you plan out carefully, not the ones you implement in a panic. So I decided to finish paying off their debt. All of it. Every last penny of that $190,000 nightmare that had been hanging over our heads for over a year. Why? Because I wanted to see the look on their faces when they realized they'd miscalculated. They thought they had me figured out. The devoted husband who'd do anything for his wife. The responsible guy who always finished what he started. The sucker who'd keep paying bills no matter how badly he got treated. They weren't wrong about any of those things, exactly. But they'd forgotten one crucial detail. I was also the kind of guy who didn't like loose ends, and $60,000 worth of remaining debt was definitely a loose end. I liquidated the rest of my stock options, took out a personal loan that made my credit card company think I was either having a midlife crisis or planning to buy a boat, and scraped together every dollar I could find. Tax refund, that bonus I'd gotten for handling the server crisis, even the $200 I'd won in the Office Fantasy Football League, it all went toward the final payment. The math was brutal, but oddly satisfying. Like performing surgery on my own financial future, except instead of saving the patient, I was deliberately flatlining the bastard. By the time I was done, my savings account looked like a ghost town, my investment portfolio was basically non-existent, and my debt-to-income ratio would have made a bankruptcy lawyer weep. But hey, at least I'd be debt-free. Well, technically Alicia's family would be debt-free, which was apparently the same thing according to the marriage contract I'd signed in a haze of romantic optimism. On a Thursday morning in mid-April, I made the final electronic transfer. $60,000, sent off into the digital void to satisfy the last of their creditors. I printed out the confirmation receipt and stared at it for a few minutes. This little piece of paper that represented the end of the most expensive mistake I'd ever made. That evening, I came home with a bottle of wine and what I hoped looked like the expression of a man who'd just accomplished something worth celebrating. Alicia was in the kitchen making dinner, pasta with that sauce she knew I liked, which would have been sweet if it wasn't part of an elaborate deception designed to keep me compliant for a few more weeks. "Hey, babe," she said, turning to give me that smile that used to make my day and now just made me feel like I needed a shower. "How was work?" "Actually," I said, setting the wine on the counter with what I hoped was appropriate ceremony. "Today was a pretty good day. I've got some news." She perked up with what looked like genuine interest, probably thinking I'd gotten a promotion or a raise that would make her transition away from me even easier. "Oh, good news." I pulled out the receipt and placed it on the kitchen counter between us, smoothing out the creases like I was presenting a diploma. Your parents' debt is paid. All of it. You're free. The look on her face was everything I'd hoped for and more. Confusion, surprise, and then this weird mix of relief and panic that told me she was already calculating how this change affected her timeline. Wait, what? All of it. She picked up the receipt, scanning the numbers like she was trying to decode some ancient language. But I thought we had another few months of payments left. Nope, I said, popping the cork on the wine with probably more force than necessary. Decided to just finish it off. Use some savings, take care of the whole thing at once. No more monthly payments, no more stress, no more debt hanging over our heads. I poured 2 glasses of wine, handed her one, and raised mine in a toast. To financial freedom, I said, and the irony of those words in my mouth was so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife. She clinked her glass against mine, but I could see her mind racing behind her eyes. This was clearly not part of her master plan. She'd been expecting a few more months of comfortable deception, time to set up her new life with Greg while I continued playing the role of devoted husband and personal ATM. That's amazing, Gray, she said, and her voice had that careful quality it got when she was trying to figure out how to handle an unexpected situation. I can't believe you did that. You're incredible. Just wanted to take care of my family, I said, and watched her flinch slightly at the word family. Speaking of which, where are your parents? They should probably know about this. They're at their book club, she said quickly. But they'll be so relieved. Mom's been worried sick about those last few payments. I nodded and took a sip of wine, enjoying the way she was clearly trying to process this development. We made small talk for a few more minutes, her asking questions about how I'd managed to get the money together, me giving vague answers about liquidating investments and taking advantage of good market timing. Then she excused herself to go call her parents with the good news, and I heard her talking in hushed, urgent tones from the living room. Couldn't make out the words, but the tone was definitely more crisis management than celebration. When she came back to the kitchen, she had that look people get when they're about to deliver news they've been rehearsing in their head. Gray, she said, sitting down across from me at the table like she was about to conduct a job interview. There's something I need to tell you. And there it was. The moment I'd been waiting for, the conversation that was supposed to devastate me and leave me wondering what I'd done wrong and how I could fix things. I'm listening, I said, taking another sip of wine and trying to look like a man who had no idea his world was about to get turned upside down. She launched into what was clearly a prepared speech about how she'd been doing some thinking, how she felt like we'd grown apart, how she needed space to figure out what she really wanted. Standard breakup bullshit, delivered with the kind of fake sincerity that probably worked great on high school kids, but wasn't particularly convincing when you already knew the real story. Then came the kicker. I've been seeing someone else. Greg Whitaker, he's the regional director at my school district. He's older, more established, and he can give me the kind of life I want. She said it like she was announcing a promotion or a vacation, matter of fact, and slightly proud. Like she'd made a smart business decision rather than destroyed a marriage. And my parents are going to move in with us, she continued, because apparently this betrayal needed a few extra layers to be complete. Greg has this amazing house in Bellevue, and there's plenty of space for everyone. I sat there for a moment, letting her words hang in the air like smoke from a house fire. She was watching my face carefully, probably expecting shock, tears, maybe some begging or bargaining. The kind of emotional breakdown that would make her feel powerful and important. Instead, I stood up slowly, walked to the counter, and calmly poured myself another glass of wine. Well, I said, turning back to face her with what I hoped was an appropriately devastating smile. Then all of you need to leave. The look on her face was absolutely priceless. Like someone had just told her that gravity was optional, and she was welcome to test the theory by jumping off a cliff. You know that moment in action movies where the villain thinks they've won, starts gloating about their master plan, and then the hero reveals they've been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers? Yeah, well, welcome to my favorite part of this whole clusterfuck. Alicia's face went through about 17 different expressions in the span of 3 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, then this weird kind of nervous laughter that people do when they think someone's joking but aren't quite sure. Like when your boss says you're fired but they're smiling. So maybe it's April Fool's Day, or maybe your life just imploded. What? She said, and I could practically hear the gears grinding in her head as she tried to process what I'd just told her. That's not how this works. Oh, but it absolutely was how this worked. See, while she'd been busy planning her exit strategy and picking out curtains for Greg's place in Bellevue, I'd been doing a little research of my own. Turns out, when you renovate a property and put it entirely in your name, you get to make decisions about who lives there. Revolutionary concept, I know. I'm sorry, I said, not sounding sorry at all. But did you think you could just announce you're leaving me for your boss, and then continue living in my house? Like I'm running some kind of boarding house for cheating wives and their enabler families. The nervous laughter got a little more hysterical. Gray, come on. Be reasonable. We can work something out here. You don't just kick people out of their home. Their home. That was rich. The home I'd bought with my money, renovated with my savings, and put under my name because they didn't have the credit score to qualify for a library card, let alone a mortgage. That's when Sylvia and Arnold decided to make their grand entrance, probably having heard raised voices and figured they should come investigate. They walked into the kitchen with the kind of casual confidence that suggested they still thought they were the ones in control of this situation. What's all the commotion about? Sylvia asked, looking between Alicia and me like she was trying to figure out which one of us had broken something valuable. Arnold put on his best dad voice, the one he used when he wanted to sound authoritative, but mostly just sounded like a substitute teacher trying to control a classroom full of kids who knew he was powerless. Grayson, let's be civil here. No need to get upset about whatever this is. Civil, right? Because there's nothing uncivil about spending over a year planning to dump someone as soon as they finish paying your debts. That's just good manners, apparently. Oh, I'm not upset, I said, and honestly, I wasn't. I was something better than upset. I was prepared. I'm just explaining the new living arrangements. Since Alicia has decided to move in with her boyfriend and take you two along for the ride, you'll all need to find somewhere else to live. Sylvia's face went pale, then red, then this weird purple color that made me wonder if I should call 911 or just wait to see if she'd explode on her own. Boyfriend? What boyfriend? Alicia shot her mother a look that could have melted steel, clearly regretting that her parents hadn't been briefed on how this conversation was supposed to go. Amateur mistake, really. If you're going to run a long con, you need to make sure all your conspirators are reading from the same script. Mom, I told you about Greg, Alicia said through gritted teeth, trying to do damage control while her carefully planned revelation turned into a three-ring circus. You said he was a friend, Arnold protested, his voice getting that high-pitched quality it got when he was stressed. You said you were just getting career advice. Well, this was getting interesting. Apparently, even Alicia's parents hadn't been fully informed about the timeline of her affair. They'd known she was planning to leave me. That much was clear from the conversation I'd overheard, but the details had been kept vague. Probably better for everyone's plausible deniability. Look, Alicia said, trying to regain control of the narrative. The important thing is that we're family. We've lived here for over a year, Gray. You can't just throw us out on the street. That's when I dropped the papers on the kitchen table with the kind of dramatic flair that would have made a courtroom lawyer proud. Legal documents, all neat and official looking, with my name prominently displayed as the sole owner of the property. Actually, I said, tapping the deed with my finger, I absolutely can. The house is under my name. The renovation was paid for with my money. The mortgage is in my name. All of you are essentially tenants, and I'm giving you notice. They stared at the papers like I'd just shown them evidence that aliens existed and they'd been probed. Which, come to think of it, might have been less shocking than discovering that the guy they'd been playing for a sucker actually understood property law. Sylvia was the first to find her voice, and when she did, it came out as this indignant squawk that reminded me why I'd never particularly enjoyed her company. But you paid off our debt. That was supposed to. I mean, we thought. You thought what? I asked, genuinely curious about how they'd imagined this would play out. That paying your debt was some kind of rental agreement? That I'd bought myself a lifetime of supporting people who think I'm a joke? Arnold tried a different approach, going for the whole, let's be reasonable men, angle that probably worked great in whatever decade he thought he was still living in. Now, Grayson, there's no need for hostility. We can figure this out like adults. Maybe we can arrange some kind of transition period, help everyone adjust to the new situation. A transition period. Like I was a fucking HR department helping employees adjust to a corporate restructuring instead of a husband who'd just been informed his marriage was over and his in-laws thought he was hilarious. The transition period ended when Alicia announced she was moving in with Greg. I said, "You want to be one big happy family? Great. Go be one somewhere else." That's when Alicia tried to play her trump card, the one she probably thought would make me back down and start begging for forgiveness. "You're being cruel, Gray. We used you, okay?" So what? That's life. People use each other all the time. At least we were honest about it in the end. She said it with this defiant tilt to her chin, like admitting to manipulation was some kind of brave truth-telling instead of just confirming what a piece of shit she was. Like I should be grateful for her honesty about lying to me for over a year. "We win," she continued, warming up to her theme. "Greg can give me things you never could. Stability, security, a real future. You're just a guy who fixes computers and lives in the same boring house in the same boring neighborhood doing the same boring job. We're moving up in the world." And there it was, the mask finally coming off completely. No more pretending to care about my feelings or trying to let me down easy. Just pure, undiluted contempt for the man who'd spent the last year working himself to death to solve her family problems. I let her words hang in the air for a moment, watching as all three of them waited for my reaction. They probably expected tears or anger or some desperate attempt to win her back by promising to be more exciting or successful or whatever the hell they thought I was lacking. Instead, I smiled. The kind of smile that makes people nervous because they can't tell if you're about to laugh or commit a felony. "Not quite," I said, and pulled out my phone. Time for the real show to begin. There's nothing quite like the moment when you get to flip the script on people who think they're smarter than you. It's like watching someone realize they've been playing poker while you were playing chess, and they just bet their life savings on a pair of twos. I held up my phone, finger hovering over the screen with the kind of theatrical timing that would have made Shakespeare weep with joy. All three of them were staring at me like I'd just pulled a live grenade out of my pocket, which honestly wasn't too far from the truth. "You know," I said, keeping my voice conversational, "it's funny how people think they're being clever when they're really just being loud. Take 3 weeks ago, for instance. Tuesday afternoon, around 4:30. I came home early from work. Alicia's face went from smug to confused to absolutely terrified in about 2 seconds flat. I could practically see her mental calendar, trying to figure out what had happened 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday that could possibly matter now. I heard the most interesting conversation coming from my kitchen. I continued, and watched as the blood drained from her face so fast I briefly worried she might pass out and miss the rest of my presentation. Something about whether I knew what was going on, and how you were planning to tell me after I finished paying everything off. The silence that followed was the kind you get in libraries, morgues, and moments right before someone's world implodes. Even Arnold, who usually couldn't shut up if his life depended on it, was struck speechless. "Oh, and Sylvia," I said, turning to my soon-to-be former mother-in-law with my brightest smile. "I especially loved your comment about how this house would feel less like a library once I was gone. Really captured that warm family feeling I'd been missing." Sylvia made a sound like a dying fish, all gasping and mouth opening, without any actual words coming out. She looked like someone had just told her that her lottery ticket was fake, and also she owed the IRS her firstborn child. But it was Arnold's comment that really drove the point home. And Arnold, buddy, poor Grayson, he really thought we loved him. That was pure poetry. Really showed that paternal affection I'd grown so fond of. Arnold's face went through more colors than a mood ring in a paint store. Red, white, purple, then this sickly green that suggested his digestive system was considering a full-scale revolt against the situation. I hit play on the recording. Their own voices filled the kitchen, crystal clear and absolutely damning. The conversation I'd captured that day, complete with Alicia talking about moving in with Greg, Sylvia bitching about my house being too quiet, and Arnold's charming assessment of my gullibility. As their recorded laughter echoed through the room, I watched their faces with the kind of satisfaction that probably wasn't healthy, but felt absolutely fucking fantastic. It was like watching people realize they'd been caught shoplifting while the security cameras were rolling. That's illegal," Alicia stammered, grasping for straws like a drowning person reaching for a life preserver made of tissue paper. "You can't record people without their permission." "Actually," I said, putting my phone back in my pocket with a satisfied pat. Washington is a two-party consent state for phone calls, but there's no expectation of privacy in common areas of your own home, especially when people are discussing plans to defraud you. Funny how that works. The legal research had been almost as satisfying as the recording itself. Turns out, when you spend over a year getting screwed by people, you develop a real appreciation for understanding exactly what your rights are. Besides, I continued, this isn't the only evidence I have. Bank records showing exactly who paid what, documentation of all the renovation expenses, records of every debt payment. Amazing what you can prove when you actually keep track of things. That's when I pulled out the letter from my lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but Rebecca Morrison, the kind of divorce attorney who ate cheating spouses for breakfast and used their assets as coffee stirrers. I'd hired her 2 weeks ago, right after I decided to stop being reactive and start being strategic. This is a lawsuit for divorce with alimony, I said, sliding the papers across the table like I was dealing cards in the world's most expensive poker game. Turns out, adultery affects spousal support calculations in some pretty interesting ways. Alicia snatched up the papers, scanning them with growing horror. Alimony? You want alimony from me? Oh, not just from you, I said, and this was where things got really fun. See, Greg knew you were married when he started this relationship. That makes him what's legally called a paramour, and in cases of alienation of affection, he can be held financially responsible for his role in breaking up a marriage. I watched as understanding dawned on their faces like the world's most unwelcome sunrise. They'd thought they were dealing with some naive computer nerd who'd just roll over and take whatever they dished out. Instead, they were finding out they'd fucked with someone who understood that revenge was best served with proper legal documentation. You can't sue Greg, Alicia protested, but her voice had lost all its earlier confidence. He didn't know? I mean, I never told him. Funny thing about that, I said, pulling out another set of papers. Text messages, emails, photos of you wearing your wedding ring at school district events where Greg was present. Amazing what people post on social media when they think nobody's paying attention. Sylvia finally found her voice, though it came out as more of a croak than actual speech. This is vindictive. We're family. No, I said, standing up and towering over the table like some kind of suburban avenging angel. We were never family. I was an ATM with legs and a mortgage. You made that very clear in your little kitchen conversation. Arnold tried one last desperate play for sympathy. Grayson, surely we can work something out. Maybe we got carried away, said some things we didn't mean. Oh, you meant every word, I interrupted. The question is whether you meant to get caught saying them. That's when the doorbell rang, and I swear the sound made all three of them jump like they'd been electrocuted. Perfect timing, really, because I'd been wondering when my guests would arrive. That'll be the sheriff, I said casually, like I was announcing that pizza delivery had arrived instead of legal officers with court summons. Funny how fast these things move when you have evidence and a good lawyer. I walked to the front door while they sat there in stunned silence, probably trying to figure out if this was some elaborate nightmare they could wake up from. The sheriff's deputy was exactly on time, professional and courteous, with a stack of legal papers that represented months of careful planning finally coming to fruition. Evening, sir, the deputy said. I have summons for Alicia Moore, Gregory Whitaker, Sylvia Patterson, and Arnold Patterson. They're all in the kitchen, I said, leading him inside like I was hosting a dinner party instead of serving legal papers. Except Greg. He'll need to be served at his workplace tomorrow. Watching them receive those summons was like Christmas morning. If Christmas involved watching people realize their lives had just become exponentially more complicated and expensive. The deputy explained their court dates, their legal obligations, and the consequences of ignoring the proceedings with the kind of professional detachment that made everything seem even more official and terrifying. After he left, the three of them sat around my kitchen table looking like survivors of some kind of natural disaster. Which, in a way, they were. They'd just been hit by Hurricane Grayson, and the cleanup was going to take a while. This is insane, Alicia said finally, her voice small and shaky. All this over some stupid comments. No, I corrected her. All this over a year of fraud, manipulation, and adultery. The comments were just the confession. I looked around at the three people who'd spent months laughing about how easily they'd played me, and felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Complete and total satisfaction. Now, I said, checking my watch like I had somewhere important to be. You have 30 days to find new living arrangements. I suggest you start looking. The best part? They still thought I was the same pushover who'd spent a year solving their problems. They were about to find out how wrong they were. You know what they say about the best revenge being served cold? Well, mine came with a side of poetic justice and a garnish of sweet irony that would have made a master chef weep with envy. The next few weeks unfolded like watching dominoes fall, except each domino was a piece of their carefully constructed fantasy life, and I had a front row seat to the whole beautiful disaster. Alicia moved out first, probably thinking she was making some grand exit that would leave me devastated and begging her to come back. She packed her stuff with the kind of dramatic flair that suggested she'd been practicing this moment in the mirror, all meaningful looks and heavy sighs like she was the tragic heroine in some soap opera instead of a cheating wife facing the consequences of her choices. Greg's place in Bellevue was apparently everything she'd dreamed of, modern, expensive, and far enough from reality that she could pretend she was living in a romantic comedy instead of a cautionary tale about adultery. For about 2 weeks, anyway. See, the thing about dating your boss while you're married to someone else is that it tends to create what HR departments like to call complications. And when those complications involve lawsuits and court dates and the kind of legal paperwork that makes school district administrators nervous about their funding, well, suddenly your romantic workplace affair starts looking less like a fairy tale and more like a liability. I heard through the grapevine. Okay, fine, I may have done some light social media stalking, that Greg's enthusiasm for their relationship cooled considerably once my lawyer started asking questions about his income and assets. Funny how quickly "I can give you the life you deserve" turns into "maybe we should take a break and see how this legal thing plays out." The lawsuit hit about 3 weeks after she moved in with him. Turns out, Greg was the kind of middle management coward who talked a big game about stability and security right up until someone threatened his comfortable suburban lifestyle. When faced with the choice between fighting for his girlfriend and protecting his career, he chose his 401k over romance. Alicia lasted exactly 11 days after getting dumped before she tried calling me. Not to apologize, mind you. That would have required acknowledging she'd done something wrong. No, she called because she needed a place to stay and somehow thought I might be feeling charitable toward the woman who'd spent a year planning to destroy my life. "Gray, we need to talk," she said when I answered the phone, using that voice she used to use when she wanted something. "I made some mistakes, but we can work through this." "No, we can't," I said and hung up. Amazing how satisfying it can be to use exactly 2 words to end a conversation that probably would have lasted an hour if I'd been feeling masochistic. Meanwhile, Sylvia and Arnold were discovering that living with their older daughter wasn't quite the comfortable retirement plan they'd envisioned. Apparently, Alicia's sister had some very firm opinions about freeloading relatives and their contributions to household expenses. Who knew? The house sold faster than I'd expected. $260,000 for a renovated duplex in a great neighborhood. Turns out all that money I'd spent on upgrades actually meant something. After paying off the mortgage and covering the legal fees, I walked away with about $40,000 profit. Not exactly lottery money, but considering I'd started this whole adventure thinking I was investing in my future with Alicia, it felt like winning the jackpot. The alimony settlement was the cherry on top of this revenge sundae. $25,000 from Alicia, paid out over 2 years because apparently her school counselor salary wasn't quite as flexible as she'd thought it would be. Watching her realize she'd have to actually budget for the consequences of her actions was almost as satisfying as the money itself. Greg's settlement was smaller, $10,000 to avoid the public scandal that would have come with a full trial. But the real victory was watching him learn that actions have consequences, even for middle-aged regional directors who think they're entitled to other people's wives. The best part wasn't the money, though. It was the silence. For the first time in over a year, I could come home to a house that was actually mine, without having to deal with Sylvia's passive-aggressive comments about my housekeeping, or Arnold's terrible jokes, or Alicia's fake smiles while she planned my emotional execution. I could watch whatever I wanted on TV without negotiating. I could eat cereal for dinner without judgment. I could leave my computer projects spread out on the dining room table without someone moving them to make room for family dinners that felt more like hostage situations. The quiet was incredible. Not the oppressive quiet that Sylvia had complained about, but the peaceful quiet of a life without drama, manipulation, or people who thought your kindness was weakness. I started dating again, slowly and carefully this time. Coffee dates, casual conversations, getting to know people without the pressure of trying to build a life with someone who might be planning to demolish it. It was refreshing to discover that there were actually women out there who appreciated honesty, who didn't see kindness as an opportunity for exploitation, who understood that relationships were supposed to be partnerships instead of con games. The whole experience had taught me to listen more carefully, to pay attention to actions instead of just words, to trust my instincts when something felt off. Expensive lessons, sure, but worth every penny for the peace of mind that who deserved it. But mostly, I just enjoyed the silence. The beautiful, drama-free silence of a life rebuilt on my own terms. 2 years later, I'm sitting in my quiet apartment in Fremont, drinking coffee that actually tastes good because I finally learned how to use a French press properly, and reflecting on what might be the most expensive education I've ever received. But you know what? It was worth every damn penny. My place isn't much to look at. A simple 2-bedroom rental with decent light and neighbors who mind their own business. No fancy duplex, no complicated family dynamics, no in-laws planning my financial demise over breakfast. Just me, my books, my computer setup that would make tech nerds weep with envy, and the kind of peace that money really can buy if you're smart about how you spend it. I've started dating again, but I approach it like debugging code now, methodically, carefully, and with a healthy appreciation for red flags that I used to ignore. Sarah's been around for about 6 months now, and she's everything Alicia pretended to be. Honest about her student loans from the start, pays for her own meals half the time, and actually laughs at my terrible programming jokes because she thinks they're genuinely funny, not because she's trying to butter me up for something. She's a graphic designer with her own apartment, her own car, and her own life that doesn't revolve around using other people to solve her problems. Novel concept, right? When she says she loves me, I actually believe her, probably because she's never asked me to pay for anything more expensive than coffee. The trust thing took some work. I won't lie and say I bounced back from the whole Alicia disaster like some kind of relationship superhero. There were definitely some dates where I spent more time looking for hidden agendas than actually getting to know people. But therapy helped. Turns out there are professionals who specialize in helping people figure out the difference between being cautious and being paranoid. Dr. Martinez taught me to listen to my gut without letting it run my entire life. That little voice that tried to warn me about Alicia's debt revelation and her parents' weird enthusiasm for my money. Yeah, I pay attention to that now. But I also learned that not every woman who forgets her wallet is running a long con, and not every family dinner invitation is a trap. The volunteer work started about a year ago, mostly because I had time on my hands and a newly developed appreciation for helping people who actually needed it. I work with a local literacy program, teaching adults basic computer skills. It's the kind of work that makes you feel useful without anyone trying to manipulate you into bankruptcy. These are people who genuinely want to learn, who appreciate your time and effort, who say thank you and actually mean it. Last month, a 50-year-old guy named Marcus got his first email account and nearly cried when he sent a message to his daughter across the country. That's the kind of moment that reminds you why helping people is supposed to feel good. But my favorite part of the week is definitely Sunday afternoons with my niece Maya. She's 8 now, smart as hell, and has declared that I'm the smartest man on earth because I taught her how to code a simple game on my laptop. Kids got good taste in uncles, obviously. Maya doesn't know the details of what happened with Alicia. She just knows that Uncle Gray used to be married and now he's not, and that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes that require them to start over. She's got this beautiful simplicity about relationships that I kind of envy. You're either nice to people or you're not. You either keep your promises or you don't. And if someone is mean to you, you don't invite them to your birthday party. Uncle Gray, she told me last week while we were building a blanket fort in my living room. You're way happier now than you used to be. Before, you always looked tired, like you had too much homework. Out of the mouths of babes, right? She was absolutely right. I had been tired, bone-deep exhausted from trying to make a fundamentally dishonest situation work. from carrying the financial and emotional weight of people who saw my kindness as weakness. Maybe I was foolish once. Maybe I believed in people too easily, trusted too quickly, and assumed that everyone shared my definition of what marriage and family were supposed to mean. Maybe I spent too much time trying to be the guy who could fix everyone's problems instead of recognizing when people were just using me as a walking solution to their own bad decisions. But now I'm free. Free from the drama, free from the manipulation, free from people who think your generosity is their birthright. I've got a savings account that's slowly rebuilding itself, a job I actually enjoy without the pressure of supporting an entire extended family's worth of debt, and relationships based on mutual respect instead of financial dependence. I'm whole in ways I didn't even know I was broken before. I sleep better, laugh more, and haven't had a stress headache in over a year. My blood pressure is probably the best it's been since college, and I haven't had a single anxiety attack about money since I stopped paying for other people's mistakes. And the best part? They're gone. All of them. Alicia, Sylvia, Arnold, and their whole toxic family dynamic that treated kindness like currency and marriage like a business transaction. They're living their lives somewhere else, dealing with the consequences of their choices, and I genuinely don't care how that's working out for them. Some people might call that cold, but I call it healthy. I learned the hard way that you can't save people who don't want to be saved, and you can't love people into being better than they choose to be. Peace, it turns out, is way more valuable than people who don't deserve it.